My dad replaced me with my step-siblings. He skipped my graduation and left me out of his 50th birthday. So I showed up uninvited and handed him the legal papers for the college fund he stole from me. Hey everyone, this is a tough one to share. And I've really struggled with whether to put it out there. It's a lot, but I just need to get it off my chest. So here goes. My dad, Mitchell, and I were inseparable when I was growing up. He was my absolute hero, no question. My parents divorced when I was 8, but it wasn't messy. They made sure to keep things civil for my sake. I lived with my mom during the week, but weekends were always dedicated to dad. And those weekends, they were the highlight of my entire week. Every Friday after school, I'd practically dive into his car, buzzing with excitement for whatever adventures he had planned. Dad wasn't the type to just sit me in front of the TV while he did his own thing. He went out of his way to make every single weekend memorable. We'd go hiking, or he'd teach me how to fix stuff around the house. Sometimes we'd just relax watching documentaries because he knew I loved soaking up random trivia. He always told me how proud he was. If I nailed a test or even something small like winning a spelling bee, he'd look me straight in the eye and say, "You're my smart, strong girl." Those words meant the world to me. For a long time I truly believed nothing could ever come between us. But then I turned 13 and things began to shift. That's when my dad met Camille. Initially, I didn't have any issues with her. She was energetic and kind, always asking about my schoolwork or what books I was reading. She had 2 children from a previous marriage. Evan, who was 12, and Maddie, 10. They seemed perfectly nice, and for a while I even thought it would be cool to have step-siblings. But then they moved in, and that's when everything truly started to change. Not long after, Camille quit her job, claiming she wanted to dedicate herself to family life. I didn't really think much of it at the time, but it meant Dad had to work even longer hours to support everyone. He started getting home later and later, and when he was home, his entire focus seemed to be on Camille and her children. I tried my best to adapt. I told myself it was just a new family dynamic, and eventually things would settle. But as time went on, settling just meant I was slowly fading into the background. Dinner conversations revolved exclusively around Evan's baseball games or Maddie's ballet recitals. If I tried to share something I was excited about, like a science fair project I'd poured my heart and soul into, I'd get a quick, "That's great, sweetie," before the topic immediately circled back to them. It wasn't just the little things, though. Camille's kids consistently took precedence no matter what. I recall one summer, I was really looking forward to visiting my paternal grandparents, something we did every single year. But Camille suggested a theme park instead, because Maddie had never been. And just like that, my plans were canceled. Mine. The real turning point hit during my junior year of high school. One evening, Mom sat me down, her expression serious. "There's something you need to know about your college fund," she began. She then told me Dad had used it, all of it. I was completely stunned. "What do you mean he used it?" It turned out he'd completely emptied the fund to pay for Evan's private school tuition. Camille had apparently convinced him that Evan was struggling in public school and needed a more supportive environment. So the money Dad had diligently saved for my future, he spent on her son. Mom only discovered this while going through some old paperwork with Dad, and felt I had an absolute right to know. I didn't even wait to process the information. That night, I called my dad and flat out asked him if it was true. At first, he tried to downplay it, saying Evan really needed the extra support. He told me, "We'll figure something out for your college." I sat there, phone glued to my ear, absolutely speechless. "Figure something out?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "That was my college fund, Dad. How could you spend it without even talking to me?" His response was infuriatingly casual. "You're smart. You'll be fine. Your mom can help, and I'll pitch in where I can when the time comes." Like it was no big deal. I hung up on him, tears streaming, and cried for hours. Over the next few days, I desperately tried to make sense of it. This was the same man who had always called me his #1 girl, who swore he'd always have my back. Yet, when it truly mattered, he chose Camille's son over me. It wasn't just about the money. It was the utter disregard for how this would impact my future. When I eventually spoke to him again, he doubled down, insisting Evan needed a better school and that I'd understand someday. But I didn't understand, not then, not now. All I could feel was how incredibly unfair it was. That money was promised for my education and it was simply gone. A few months later, as if the college fund betrayal wasn't enough, I discovered Dad had bought Evan a brand new SUV for his 18th birthday. My gut twisted when I heard. The same man who claimed he couldn't afford to help with my tuition somehow found the money to splurge on a luxury car for Camille's son. It became painfully clear whose struggles truly mattered to him. After that, our relationship fundamentally changed. I couldn't see him the same way. Every visit to his house felt like I didn't belong. Camille would make thinly veiled comments about my infrequent visits, but when I did show up, it was the same old story. Dinner conversations fixated on Evan and Maddie, and any attempt I made to talk about my own life was brushed aside. It wasn't just the college fund, it was a clear pattern. Dad would miss my school events because Maddie had a recital, or family vacations would be planned entirely around their schedules. Every decision he made seemed to prioritize them over me. By my senior year, my expectations for him had plummeted. I still saw him now and then, but it felt more like a duty than a desire. The man who once made me feel like the most important person in the world had clearly relegated me to the periphery of his new family. Our relationship felt like a burdensome chore. Every visit, every conversation was strained and performative. After the college fund incident, I'd already lowered my expectations, but that year just confirmed how far I'd fallen on his priority list. I didn't cut him off entirely. I still visited some weekends, largely at my mom's urging. "He's still your father," she'd insist, as if that made everything okay. But each time I entered that house, I felt like a stranger, an unwelcome guest in a home Camille and her kids had completely taken over. One weekend, I showed up and immediately regretted it. The moment I walked through the door, Camille greeted me with a syrupy, "Oh, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence." Her smile was fake, her tone anything but playful. I just chuckled it off, but inside I was seething. I was making the effort and that's the welcome I got? Dinner that night was exactly as I'd predicted. Camille spent half the meal detailing the stress of juggling Maddie's upcoming dance recital, while Evan chimed in about his baseball tryouts. Dad, of course, was completely absorbed, nodding, asking questions, fully engaged. I sat there trying to find an opening to share something about my own life. When I finally managed to mention my college acceptances, Camille barely let me finish before rerouting the conversation back to Maddie's rehearsal schedule. Dad didn't seem to notice, or perhaps he just didn't care. I just stared at my plate, questioning why I even bothered. But it wasn't just dinner. It was everything. Camille had a knack for making me feel like an outsider without ever being overtly rude. She'd plan family outings without ever bothering to ask if I wanted to join. I'd only hear about them afterward, when Maddie or Evan would casually mention how much fun they'd had at the zoo or the movies. One time, I overheard them discussing a camping trip for the weekend. When I asked Dad about it, he simply shrugged and said, "Oh, I didn't think you'd be interested." Really? We used to go camping all the time. It was our thing. Now it was as if I didn't even exist. The cruelest part was how utterly normal it all seemed to them. Camille treated me like a distant relative making an occasional appearance, not Dad's actual daughter. And Dad just went along with it, acting as if this was how things were always meant to be. I tried talking to him about it once, but he dismissed me. "You're overthinking it," he said. "You've got your own life now. You don't need to be here all the time." Maybe he was right. Maybe I didn't need to be there, but that didn't lessen the sting. By late spring, I'd emotionally checked out. I still visited occasionally, but I kept my guard up. I'd sit through dinner, nodding and offering polite smiles, but I wasn't truly present. I'd become a spectator in my own family, watching from the sidelines as they lived their lives. One weekend, I decided to test the waters, to see if Dad would even notice how disengaged I was. I barely spoke a word during dinner, simply nodding along as they discussed Maddie's recital and Evan's baseball games. Dad didn't address me once throughout the entire meal. Not a single question about school, my college plans, or anything happening in my life. Camille, naturally, filled the silence with her usual tales of how demanding it was to juggle everything with 2 kids. As if I, his kid, wasn't right there. After dinner, I attempted a one-on-one conversation with Dad. I suggested we go for a walk like we used to. He agreed, but halfway through, just as I was about to voice how left out I felt, how much he'd changed, Camille called his phone. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but whatever it was urgent enough for him to cut our time short. "Sorry, sweetie," he said, patting my shoulder. "Camille needs me to help with something at home." And that was that. I rarely visited after that. Initially, I felt a pang of guilt, as if I was abandoning him. But the truth was staying away hurt less. I focused on school and my own future. I picked up a part-time job to start saving for college, since Dad's vague promise of figuring something out had clearly been empty words. Mom helped as much as she could, but money was tight. She truly was my biggest cheerleader, my absolute rock. Whenever I came home feeling invisible or frustrated after a weekend at Dad's, she was there with a sympathetic ear and my favorite cup of tea. I stopped bothering to bring up anything happening in my life with Dad. What was the point? He was far too busy playing super dad to Camille's kids to notice anything I was going through. The final blow came just weeks before my high school graduation. I had hoped, even prayed, that Dad would actually show up for this one. I hadn't asked him for much over the past year. All I wanted was for him to be there, to see me walk across that stage and hear my name called. But a week before the ceremony, it wasn't Dad who called me. It was Camille. "Hey," she began. "Just wanted to let you know your dad won't be able to make it to your graduation. Maddie's dance competition is the same day, and you know how important that is to her." I was speechless, just sat there holding the phone, a knot of anger and disbelief tightening in my stomach. She offered no apology, no pretense of caring how I felt. It was simply, "Maddie's thing is more important. Period." I didn't even bother calling Dad to argue. What was the point? He'd made his choice, just like always. My expectations for Dad had already dwindled to next to nothing after the graduation miss, the college fund, and his constant favoritism of Camille's kids. Yet, even with all that, his 50th birthday was approaching, and I still felt compelled to acknowledge it. It just felt like one of those fundamental family duties, regardless of how distant we'd become. He was still my father. A week before his birthday, I picked out a gift, nothing extravagant, just a World War II history book I knew he'd love. He'd always been a history buff, and we used to bond over that stuff when I was younger. It felt like a safe, thoughtful choice, a small olive branch that might remind him of the connection we once shared. On his birthday, I decided to stop by his house after work to drop it off. I didn't text or call ahead. I imagined it would be a quick, casual visit. A brief chat, hand over the gift, and I'd be on my way. But as I pulled into the driveway, I immediately sensed something was off. The house was ablaze with lights, cars lined the street, and I could hear music and laughter spilling from the backyard. For a split second, I thought I'd misremembered the date. But no, it was definitely his birthday. I just sat in my car trying to process what I was seeing. I wasn't invited. That realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just a small family gathering. It was a full-blown party, a celebration for his 50th, and I hadn't even been told. Part of me wanted to just turn around, leave the gift on the porch and pretend I'd never come. But another part, perhaps the lingering hope that things could still be mended, urged me to go in. I knocked and Camille answered. Her smile faltered when she saw me, as if she was scrambling to figure out why I was there. "Oh," she said after a beat. "We didn't know you were coming." I forced a smile, holding up the gift. "I just wanted to drop this off for Dad. Is he around?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. "He's in the backyard," she said, gesturing toward the noise. I could feel her eyes on me as I walked through the house, and it took every ounce of my willpower not to spin around and demand an explanation for my exclusion. The backyard was packed. String lights twinkled everywhere. A catered buffet lined one side, and a DJ spun music in the corner. It looked like something straight out of a magazine. Dad was near the grill, laughing with a group of relatives I hadn't seen in years. He looked up, spotted me, and waved me over. "Miller." "Hey," he said, pulling me into a quick hug. "I wasn't expecting you." I handed him the gift. "Happy birthday," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. He opened it right there, a genuine smile spreading across his face when he saw the book. "Wow, this is great. Thanks, kiddo." For a brief moment, I almost forgot my anger. He seemed truly happy to see me, and it reminded me of the Dad I used to know. But then the moment passed and I was standing there, surrounded by people who had all been invited, who were clearly part of this celebration, while I was an obvious afterthought. "Did Camille not tell you about the party?" Dad asked casually, as if it were a minor oversight. "No," I said, trying to mask the hurt in my voice. "I just came by to drop off your gift. I didn't know there was a party." His face fell for a split second, but he quickly recovered. "Well, I'm glad you're here now. Grab a plate and stick around." But his words felt less like a welcome and more like an obligation. An attempt to smooth things over without actually acknowledging the underlying issue. I stayed for about 20 minutes, making polite small talk with a few relatives and forcing down some food. Camille hovered nearby, watching me, as if expecting me to cause a scene. I thought about confronting Dad right then, asking him point-blank why I wasn't invited, but I didn't want to embarrass myself in front of everyone. As I left, I replayed the whole scene in my head, desperately wondering if I had done something to deserve being left out. Was it my infrequent visits? My inability to fit into their perfect family dynamic? Was Camille the real problem? But regardless of the reason, I was undeniably an outsider in my own father's life. For days afterward, a heavy weight pressed down on my chest. I couldn't focus on school, couldn't concentrate at work. Each time I thought about the party, a surge of anger and sadness, too deep for words, washed over me. It wasn't just about the party. It was about everything. The college fund, missing my graduation, the relentless favoritism. This party was just another painful reminder that I simply wasn't a priority in his life. I tried to push it aside, to tell myself it didn't matter, but it did. It mattered profoundly. I didn't call Dad after that, and he didn't call me. Weeks turned into months, and the silence between us became deafening. I kept hoping he'd reach out, apologize, or at least explain why I was excluded, but he never did. It was as if the entire incident never happened. Eventually, I realized I was clinging to something that no longer existed. The dad I'd idolized, the one who once made me feel like his entire world was gone. Or perhaps he was never truly that person and I was just too young to see it. Either way, something inside me broke, and no matter how much I wanted to fix it, I couldn't do it alone. Then came Maddie's engagement. I found out the same way I typically learned about major events in Dad's new family. Social media. There it was on my feed. A picture of Maddie beaming, an enormous diamond ring on her finger, surrounded by a crowd of people I barely recognized. Dad and Camille, of course, were front and center, looking like proud parents. The caption read, "Can't wait to marry the love of my life. Thanks to my amazing family for making this day so special." At first, I assumed the engagement party might have been a small, impromptu gathering. I tried not to jump to conclusions, but as more pictures surfaced, it became undeniably clear this was no casual get-together. It was a full-blown event, decorations, catered food, even a photo booth. And once again, guess who wasn't invited? I didn't bother calling Dad to ask why. What was the point? He'd either blame Camille as always or dismiss it as no big deal. So I stayed silent and tried to convince myself I didn't care. But it was impossible not to, especially when seemingly everyone I knew was posting pictures from the party. Aunts, uncles, cousins. They were all there, smiling and laughing as if it were the happiest moment in the world. I held on to a sliver of hope that Maddie's actual wedding would be different. Surely I'd receive an invitation to that, right? A wedding is a significant event. Even if Maddie and I weren't close, I was still family. Or at least I was supposed to be. Weeks passed and I heard nothing. No phone calls, no texts, no wedding invitation in the mail. I tried to reassure myself that perhaps they just hadn't sent them out yet. But when I discreetly asked a cousin, she accidentally let slip that the invitations had already been mailed weeks ago. "I'm sure yours is on the way," she said, giving me a look that confirmed she knew that wasn't true. A few days later, a text arrived from one of my cousins. "Hey, Maddie wanted me to let you know the wedding is on a location. Hope you can make it." That was it. No explanation for the delay, no acknowledgement of me as family, not even a direct invitation from Maddie or Dad themselves. Just a lazy second-hand message, as if I were a mere acquaintance. It didn't feel like an invitation. It felt like a begrudging formality they couldn't be bothered to handle properly. I stared at the text for a long time, trying to sort through my emotions. Hurt? Absolutely. Angry? Definitely. But more than anything, I just felt exhausted. Exhausted from constantly being an afterthought. exhausted from trying to force myself into a family that clearly didn't care if I was part of it. For a brief moment, I considered going perhaps to keep the peace, to prove I was the bigger person. But then I imagined sitting in the back row, watching Maddie beam while Dad delivered a toast, likely calling her the daughter he was so proud of, wondering why he couldn't utter those words about me anymore. I realized I couldn't do it. Not to make a statement but to protect myself. Attending that wedding wouldn't fix anything. It wouldn't magically integrate me into their family. If anything, it would only serve as another painful reminder that I was perpetually on the outside looking in. I decided not to go. I didn't make a grand announcement or create a fuss about it. I simply made my decision and quietly stood by it. Of course, Dad wasn't going to let it go. A couple of days later he called. The moment I saw his name on the caller ID, I knew exactly what the conversation would be about. "Miller," he began, irritation already simmering in his voice, "I just heard from Camille that you're not planning on coming to Maddie's wedding. Is that true?" "Yes," I replied, keeping my tone deliberately calm. "I decided it's better if I don't." "Better?" he repeated, as if the word itself was incomprehensible. "How is that better? She's your stepsister. This is one of the biggest days of her life. And you're just not coming." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Dad, I honestly don't feel like I'm truly wanted there. It's clear this invitation was sent out of obligation, not because anyone genuinely cares if I attend. I think it's better for everyone if I stay home." He scoffed, and I could almost picture him shaking his head on the other end of the line. "Not everything has to be about you, Miller. This isn't about whether you feel wanted. It's about Maddie. This is her big day, and you're making it about your feelings. Can't you put those aside for once?" I clenched my jaw, fighting to keep my composure. "Dad, this isn't just about the wedding. It's about everything. The college fund, my graduation, your birthday party, the engagement party. Do you not see how many times I've been excluded? How many times I've been made to feel utterly insignificant?" "Jesus, Miller," he snapped. "You're always so dramatic. Camille has worked so hard to keep this family together, and all you ever do is complain. Maybe if you tried being more supportive, things wouldn't feel so tense." "Supportive?" I echoed, my voice rising despite my efforts. "You're telling me to be supportive when I've been continually left out time and time again? You spent my college fund on Evan. You missed my graduation for Maddie's recital. You didn't even invite me to your own birthday party. And now you're telling me I'm the one who isn't supportive. That's not fair," he retorted quickly, but I could hear a flicker of guilt in his voice. "You know it's not like that." "Really? Because it feels exactly like that," I interrupted. "It feels like you've chosen Camille and her kids over me every single time. And the worst part is you don't even care how much it's hurt me." There was a long, heavy pause. For a moment I thought he might actually apologize, but instead he sighed. "Look, I don't have time for this. You're either coming to the wedding or you're not. Just know that if you don't, it's going to cause problems. Maddie will be upset. Camille will be upset. And I really don't want to deal with that." "Then don't,"